Well, hello, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this fourth Geography for Schools Q&A of this term. We're delighted to be joined this evening by Professor Katherine Brickell, who's a Professor of Human Geography here in the Department of Geography at Royal Holloway. And Katherine, first of all, thank you so much for the amazing talk that you gave last week. It was, I know already that people have been writing this week saying how inspired they were by the work that you've been doing, which is really lovely. And thank you very much for writing in with your generous comments. It's great to see you, Katherine. I know that you're at home in South London tonight, and I'm out here at Royal Holloway. We haven't seen one another for so many months. It seems bizarre, doesn't it?
It does.
But no, as I say, thank you so much for joining us. Katherine, your work is truly inspiring. It's inspiring for us here in the Department of Geography, and I know that it reaches a very large national and international audience as well. We're grateful to you for sharing it with us this evening. Katherine, for those people who perhaps don't know you and who weren't able to join in on the talk last week, do you want to just say a little bit about yourself and maybe just 2 or 3 minutes review of what you were talking about last week?
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. My name's Katherine, as Alice said. So I'm a professor in the department, and most of my research focuses on development issues in Southeast Asia. So I've worked in Vietnam and Laos, but predominantly in Cambodia, and it's a country which I've worked in for over 15 years. So my PhD research was there. So the video you've seen is on one specific research project that ran for 3 years and finished in 2019. And it looked to the experiences of brick workers in Cambodia. There are around 10,000 brick workers in Cambodia, and my colleague Laurie Parsons in the department has actually done the first ever national survey of all brick kilns and all brick kiln workers. So we have this vast array of new data which can help inform policy decisions on the severity and experiences of debt-bonded labour. And that's something I can talk to you a bit more in detail about as we go on. So the video was kind of a fly-through of the project. The project was trying to reach not just an academic audience, but a public audience, a policymaker audience. So the infographics we found were incredibly helpful, as were the photos, to try and explain what is a very, very complex story, a complex picture. And it can be often very hard to bring together different data sets to paint that picture. So I hope that fly-through worked for you all. So as we know, it kind of started with the cityscape of Phnom Penh. So when you go to Cambodia, all you can hear in Phnom Penh is construction. It's just endless. Every single street is construction. And we wanted to look at the lives behind the growth story that is Cambodia's capital city, and look at the people who were making bricks. Now, these bricks go at the bottom of the building, and we didn't really explain that in the video. You can't often see them, but they're there. They're part of the foundations of the building, because most modern skyscrapers are not brick, are they? They're steel and other materials, but they're there in the bedrock of the buildings. And we literally tracked bricks. So in 2 ways. The first was that we went to the construction sites in Phnom Penh, and then we asked for foremen, where did you get your bricks from? And then we went to those brick kilns and looked at the working conditions in those kilns. The other way we did it was to literally follow lorries. There was even talk at one point about whether we could microchip bricks, which felt very James Bond. And that would be an amazing project in terms of how just seeing all these bricks populate buildings and their mobilities. But we did literally track the lorries to construction sites to see where they went. And then the story that I told was kind of going from the cityscape to the kiln. So this is where a population of 10,000 men, women and children work in the country, and they work there under a situation of debt bondage. So this is where, in the rural areas, the majority were farmers, and with the effects of climate change, with no NHS, no having to pay very expensive medical bills. They would often go into debt. And in the context of climate change, this would be to pay for pesticides and other inputs that they would need to try and farm. And often this just wouldn't work. And the debts would accrue so much that they sometimes approach a brick kiln owner and say, will you pay off the debt? And then the brick kiln owner will expect those labourers to stay there until the debt is paid, right, which is technically illegal. And so we were trying to understand, why do they come to be there and what can be done, essentially. And it's hugely complex, as the infographic I hope showed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the infographic is really helpful. I wish I had it kind of preloaded here, because you could have perhaps have talked it through. But I think it'd be also fair to say that infographic has been sent out to hundreds of schools across the UK, and we do actually have spare copies as well. So if any school watching here, or any teachers or any students would like copies, let us know here in the side chat, and we can have those posted out to people. But that's a really impressive piece of work in itself, the infographic. It makes this connection between debt bondage, and I know you're going to come on and make the case about, or explain why these people find themselves in that situation. Yeah. But that's where that connection to climate change comes in, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and often there isn't much work on the relationship between modern slavery and climate change, or climate change and modern slavery. The work that had been done was by an author called Kevin Bales, who wrote a book on the way that modern slavery drives climate change. So if you think about illegal deforestation, often is undertaken by people working in exploitative working conditions, some which may be described as modern slavery. So he was looking at those connections, but the other way round, there is not so much. Yeah.
So your contention in this project, of what you have found, is that climate change is leading to subsistence farms becoming less sustainable. Therefore, people are driven into kind of the commercial economy in ways that they've never had to contemplate before, and that's then leading to these exploitative economic practices, such as the situation at the brick kilns.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how far are people travelling from their farms in order to find these kilns? I mean, are these kilns, are they in every town and village? Are they in particular areas? Are people having to travel far from home in order to access the perceived opportunity, but then they find themselves in this bonded situation?
Yeah, so they are all over the country, but you do find a kind of a concentration near the two major cities. So you have Phnom Penh and Siem Reap. So in Phnom Penh, you find the brick kilns to the north of Phnom Penh, and it makes sense that you have your brick kilns near where you need your bricks, which is for city building. But you do need kind of good clay soils. So obviously the physical geography also has an impact on where they are. But you do get some villagers traveling huge distances, some you don't. But in Cambodian society, you have something called kasai, which literally means ties. So what will happen is, if one family go to work on a brick kiln, it will often be that they will then recruit others, or suggest to others, well, you've got all this debt, come with me. And you've got this idea of this rope or these ties, in which you kind of get this stream going from one village to one brick kiln. So what was really helpful was, when we worked in the brick kilns, we were asking questions about, where did you come from? And in the most the kind of the villages that had the greatest populations that had come from brick kilns, we went back to those villages, and that's where we did the research around, why did you leave, and what are the conditions in these villages that are leading you to not be able to farm anymore and need to take your family to the kilns.
Okay, so you let's get this straight. You identified bricks in Phnom Penh. You followed the bricks back to the brick kilns by asking questions.
Yes.
You then spoke to the people who were making the bricks, and then you kind of traced their experience back to particular communities where they had come from. And then you travelled back to those communities to then explore the processes that had driven them away from their ancestral subsistence farms.
Yeah, exactly. So we kind of call that like a multi-sited methodology, and geographers are really great at thinking spatially, as you all know, and not just thinking about one place and about how it might connect to other places, but also even traveling to those other places and trying to understand the links. And I think a really good example of kind of geographers' curiosity on following the thing, we often call it like following an object or a commodity or a flow of people, would be the example of when we were in a kiln and we found offcuts from the garment industry, Marks and Spencer's clothing and other brands you may know, which was being burned. And what do you do in this situation? Well, as a geographer, you think, well, where did they come from? And you trace their geography. So then we did then have to speak to lots of people about where did these garments come from. And in the end, we found that there was a secret garment dump that even the brands don't know about, that we then traveled to. And then I remember being on the dump in like the heat and the smell, and there's oxen there, and there's rotting clothes, and there's organic matter from the beer sector, and asking the scavengers about, where did these offcuts come from? And then we'd try and speak to the lorry drivers about that, and then follow it back to the bins in the factory. So, one kiln, one building can tell so many stories if you're willing to follow the people or follow the object.
I think this is really extraordinary. I mean, I'm excited by the methodologies that you used and the connections that you were able to draw. I'm excited as a geographer because of the things that you've been able to explore in this project. Modern day slavery, the forces of climate change, but then equally, it's really exposed the kind of the dark underbelly of the global economy and the new international division of labour. Mm-hmm. Because, so of course, Cambodia is renowned around the world, along with Vietnam and Sri Lanka and elsewhere, for its garments industry, producing the kind of clothes that we're, I'm probably wearing now. Yes. And not all of that gets sold, and some of it gets dumped, probably because it's not up to scratch, or it's seconds, or the fashion cycle moves on.
Yeah, it's a number of issues. So one is the fashion cycle. So the fast fashion model, one thing's fashionable 1 minute and it's not the other. But what the buyers have to do and the factories have to do is they have to almost hedge their bets. And they don't know what the demand will be from a UK consumer. So they buy more fabric than they need, right, to make sure they can service the needs of the brand, who may say, oh, actually, I need another 100,000 pieces by next week. So then what happens if it's less popular than is imagined? They have these huge reams of fabric. Equally, sometimes training is not very good in the factories, and the discard rate means that there's lots of defective clothes. And sometimes, if any of you have ever been to a market, often there's a sale of kind of defective branded clothes that have something slightly wrong. The other aspect is that there are literally offcuts, so pattern offcuts. And these are these smaller scraps that hold very little value, and they're the ones that get used in the kiln. So the story of our consumption ties very closely to why you get so much offcuts of fabric. And it also relates to climate change, which, to go full circle, if you're burning garments in a kiln, well, that creates CO2 emissions and pollution. But what's really interesting is that we have a researcher from the department, a lecturer, Laurie Parsons, who's in Cambodia at the moment. And he's been sending me photos of the next iteration of the project, which is we are now seeing factories incinerating the garments there and then, including UK brands we know well. So the
factories who produce the garments are incinerating them on site?
Yes, to actually create energy to use in the factory. But you can only imagine the environmental impact of that.
Yeah. Because I think I'm right in saying that burning cotton it releases a lot of CO2 in the burning of cotton, and even the gradual decomposition of cotton is extremely high in CO2 emissions. So to do that by putting energy into the process must be incredibly damaging environmentally. So is that having local impacts, or it's just contributing to global climate change?
I mean, it'd be global climate change as well as local impacts in terms of air quality and health. Yeah. So the smoke that comes up most of the garments have some sort of content of polyester,
Yeah.
which there's a lot of oil
Yeah.
that goes into clothing, which is another environmental issue in terms of oil usage in the garment industry. And so this noxious smoke goes up from the kiln, or it goes up from the factory, and it's black. And I remember going to the kilns, and it's acrid, and it gets into your nose and your mouth. And so the infographic that you all saw kind of attested to some of the issues that you get in terms of breathing problems. And of course, this is long-term scarring on the lungs directly from clothing. I mean, I felt very uncomfortable wearing some of those brands.
Yeah.
And of course, we don't know, and often the brands don't know, because the onus is on post after we've used it and we dump it, not necessarily on what we call pre-consumer waste. And in terms of the Modern Slavery Act, this is a UK law where every company needs to have a statement about it, whether they have modern slavery in their supply chain. But it doesn't actually really deal with very complicated supply chains that have subsidiaries. So, it's the factory that produces it for the brand, but then they don't actually look at modern slavery in the supply chain in terms of the discard, the waste. So if you think of all the waste that comes from a garment, brands don't know what happens to that waste. So that was part of the educational journey of our project, was alerting them to that and gaining statements around what they thought had happened to their waste.
So that's really interesting. So at the moment, there are no company, or very few companies perhaps, have got a really clear view of their supply chain and are properly accounting for the conditions, but then also the waste that gets produced from each of those processes.
Yeah,
because this is really fundamental, isn't it, to issues like corporate social responsibility and the kind of declarations that companies like to make about themselves as ethical and kind of moral players on the global stage.
Yeah, and often it will focus, in terms of the garment sector, on the factory floor. So it will focus on particularly women. Women in Cambodia are 80% of the population in terms of factory workers. What are their working rights? What are the working conditions in that factory? But actually, there's a much wider labour story to be told around the connections between different industries, the way that a building in Phnom Penh is partly made through garment waste of clothes that we consume in the UK. And it's only in understanding the material and environment around us and migration patterns and all sorts of economic processes. And I think that's why geography really matters for that, because there's no other discipline that will be so open to thinking about all those different connections.
No, you're absolutely right. But it strikes me also, I mean, there's so many things I want to ask you about. But, as a geographer, you've got access to this methodological toolkit where you are able to think on different scales, the global, the national, the local, then the level of the kind of the body or the air or the lungs. And you've obviously been working with some amazing local people as well. But equally, it sounds like you're drawing in other kinds of both geographical and almost like earth sciences or atmospheric sciences research as well, because to measure things like CO2 emissions in local atmospheres, were you able to do that in any meaningful way, or was that beyond the scope of this project?
So we had a few failed attempts, but we did manage to get particulate readings. So this is like air pollution readings, and you use a PM 2.5 and a PM 10 meter, and you can do it we did it at different points in the kiln, so immediately where the flume is coming out or inside people's homes. We were really interested because people live and work on the kiln. They live in corrugated homes, so if you're sleeping and resting in a home, what is the level of pollution? And the really fine particulate matter is really problematic because it can get into the lungs and even the bloodstream. So we did do those readings using these particulate analysis tools, and consistently, wherever you are on the kiln, it has a reading of 999.9, which is the maximum reading possible.
Right, so basically the scale can't get any higher than that.
It can't get any higher than that.
Right. Okay.
but there would definitely be further work that we'd like to do, working with kind of earth sciences at Royal Holloway, and we've been in discussions with them about bringing their expertise to work with us, which is exciting.
Yeah. Is there any sense of what the long-term health implications for those communities who do live so close to the kilns could be? Because presumably, as you've already said, these are deeply noxious materials. If anything, if you're burning things like polyester or anything with a colorant in it, presumably there's at least the potential for very long-term health costs to that.
I mean, sadly, it's not unusual just for people to drop down dead. That did happen frequently, and that's not just the issue of the pollutants, but if you think about brickwork, it's not mechanized. This is very we would say crafted in this country, but I think that is a misnomer in terms of it is manual labor that is making it, and very, very long working hours, because it's paid on a piece rate, so it's paid almost per brick. Right. So the more you can make, the more that you can try and repay your debt. And that's why there's such a big issue around child labour, because children get involved in trying to help their parents be more productive in terms of being able to do some of the jobs, to be able to make more bricks, to be able to pay back the debt. But the harder you work, if you think about the toll in the heat of the kiln is fierce. The lifting of the bricks, the transporting of the bricks, the machines where you can easily get an arm chopped off, which is not uncommon. So there are multiple hazards, basically.
You've brought up another issue there, and that is the fact that this then becomes a kind of an intergenerational kind of bondage, where parents are children are helping to pay off their parents' debts, but in doing so, their lives also become hefted to the system. Yeah.
And it's intergenerational on many fronts. So the first is, if a parent dies or both parents dies and the debt's still outstanding, that debt will go to the children. So yes, in intergenerational debt bondage, and they will often literally sign. The second thing, which is incredibly difficult, is if you think about life on a brick kiln, you still want to get married, potentially if you want to get married or have children, or take part in ceremonies, all these things that mean a huge amount, right? But that costs money. It costs money to go to weddings, it costs money to hold a wedding, it costs money to have children. So what do? You take more debt. So to live, you descend greater into debt. And I think that is one of the most painful things to kind of comprehend, and I find it quite hard. To have hope, to have aspiration, to have a family, it means actually working longer or harder on the kiln, that then potentially has adverse, not just physical health issues, but mental health issues, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got just a couple more questions before I want to kind of move on and talk more about you. I mean, first of all, you've exposed this. You've conducted this incredible project that's received a major award last year, and congratulations for that. Is there any sense that this has been picked up in Cambodia? Have campaigning newspapers or journalists or civil rights organisations picked up on this, and what are they doing?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. So until very recently, the Cambodian government denied that there was such a thing as debt bondage in the construction industry, and specifically brick kilns. They also denied any form of child labour, and they would give evidence that they'd done inspections and found no evidence of child labour. So the challenge was that our research was showing the direct opposite, and they've been in denial ever since. But we've done a lot of advocacy work with NGOs, with a new union for construction workers, and leveraging through the diplomatic route of the US Embassy, which often you can't get direct action with engaging with a government, and you need to work through brokers who have the pressure and the leverage to do that. So for the first time ever, bricks in Cambodia have been reclassed as products of modern slavery. So the Trafficking in Persons report is the global report where every single commodity in the world for every single country is classed as whether it's the product of modern slavery, child labour, whether there are other infringements or whether it's kind of been made in kind of ethical conditions.
Okay.
And this is used as a tool for the US government to kind of put pressure on governments. And so bricks have been reclassified by the US government as products of modern slavery, and this potentially brings particular trade sanctions and issues. So for the very first time, the Cambodian government have been in talks about actioning this, but it's a very long journey and it takes quite diplomatic work. And I think, you know, a geographer's role is about doing the research. It's also about understanding all the different myriad stakeholders. What does that, the political geography of it, what does that look like? Who has the power to make change? So in this instance, it's not the British government in Cambodia, it's the US who has leverage.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's because of their domestic legislation that has placed bricks on their national register or whatever the terminology they might use.
Trade terms in Cambodia and other developing countries are around child labour, which means that they could potentially stop certain trade agreements on the basis of things that we identified.
And that raises really interesting questions for me as a political geographer about, you know, the rise of China, because one of the things we know about China is that they, in Sri Lanka, for example, is that they place far less stringent conditions on the Sri Lankan government in relation to war and conflict and environmental legislation. And I mean, is there any sense that Vietnam could kind of pivot towards China in the hope that they would be less stringent in their demands?
Yeah, absolutely. And it definitely is. So there is this geopolitics of aid and power. And certainly in terms of Cambodia has made the pivot. It's made the pivot. Okay. And it means that the conditionally tied aid from the West, they are shunning because
they can afford to shun it.
No strings aid from elsewhere. And all of this becomes part of the diplomatic landscape of the fight for Southeast Asia.
Right.
Okay. And then actually when you look at the funding patterns of these buildings, you know, a lot is Chinese driven.
And that's a perfect lead to what was going to be my last kind of big question on this topic, which is the buildings themselves. So you know, that's the kind of the big economic force that's driving so much of this. So who are these buildings that are being built for Cambodian housing developers, or is there international money in that part of the process as well that also needs to be accounted for in corporate social responsibility and proper accounting? Because if these are buildings being built for international accountancy firms, for example, or big property or big insurance companies in the UK who invest monies all over the place, have you exposed any of those linkages? Are those linkages there?
They do exist, and we are taking legal action at the moment, quietly, which may come into the public domain at some point. But yes. Okay. UK pension pots and UK banks, but also European ones, American ones, are all implicated, as are monies from places like Singapore and Hong Kong and other places. Often we don't know where our money goes that we have in our bank account. You know, it's very hard. And we did actually work with people who understood how to kind of trace the money, follow the money. And you see in advocacy, there is this focus on following the money, because this is also where power lies in a financialized global capitalist system. So you need to understand that, to understand the nature of the buildings that are going up and who has the power.
Okay, so that's a kind of watch this space, that you're being quite guarded at the moment, because presumably you're not able to say, but that final link in the chain, or that additional link in the chain, may be exposed at some point.
Yes.
Well, good luck with that. You have all of our backing. Now, one of the things that you have produced, Katherine, is this. This is the infographic. I have the poster here. Where are we? The stunning graphic. And that's available as a brilliant poster for school classrooms, for your wall at home. It's got details also of our kind of initiative here. The Teacher Hub at Royal Holloway Geography is on there as well, along with details and links to how teachers can download teaching resources, and students can get other supporting resources as well to help with their school work. So we're happy to post this out to people. If you write to us here, and somebody already has done that, Ava, we will make sure that we send one of these out to you. We'll be in contact with you to get your address. So don't share your address with us here, but we'll be in contact with you and we'll get your details from you.
And also to say, if you want to read the full report, if you go to www.projectbloodbricks.org, there's a report that has 10 stories of modern slavery and climate change, if you want to read more.
That's brilliant.
Written for a non-academic audience.
Yeah, I'm just checking here. Your website URL is there. I know you've also got a Twitter. I think, I don't know whether that's still being updated. But that's absolutely brilliant, and it really is the most stunning and engaging website. And the report is harrowing, but also very beautiful and meaningful as well. So thanks so much for that. And then Katherine, just with a couple of minutes left, if I may indulge on your time just a little bit longer. A lot of people will at this point of the year be thinking about going on to university, and I think it's nice to hear from academics about the journey that they've taken from school through to where you are now. So can I ask, tell us a little bit about your journey in geography?
I always loved it. I did French, art and geography at A-level, and I'm from Reading, and I went to a comprehensive school, and I was the first person to ever go to UCL, and it felt like quite a big thing going to London, but it was amazing. I loved being able to go to museums, and obviously those are all the kind of things we'll be able to do again. Having it on your doorstep is great, and I think it was really good having access to lots of different working opportunities that you get from being in London or near London. So I had paid internships with a development organisation, so did desk-based reviews for the Asian Development Bank and other donors, and I worked during my degree for Z Books. So some of you may have heard of it. They're a publisher of radical political text for the general public, and so I got to see inside the editorial process, and I guess both of those are maybe explain why I write and I work on development issues in tandem with studying geography. But yeah, I do love it, and yeah, my geography teachers at school were awesome. So it just made me want to continue. Yeah.
No, that's absolutely brilliant. It's a very inspiring story, Katherine. And then I know that you obviously went on and you did your PhD and masters, and you. How long have you been at Royal Holloway for now? I can't quite remember.
It's 2008, so quite a long time. I guess you stay where you love. It's a lovely community, students and staff. It definitely has a family atmosphere, yeah. A protective cocoon, which is very much welcomed in this quite chaotic world. So it's great. It's great.
Oh, Katherine, thank you so much. Just sit tight for just a second, because I'm going to bring up just a closing slide. So we mentioned before the Teacher Hub, and here on the screen now you can see details of that Teacher Hub. This is a site on the Royal Holloway Geography website. You can download all of these sessions, the Q&As and the live lectures that accompany them. You can also do that from our YouTube page, and of course we keep them on this Facebook site as well. And alongside those, there are a number of teaching resources. There are things that you can do if you're a teacher in the classroom with your students. You can download those, and we make the connections to the A-level various different curricula for you. So do have a look at that website, and just let us know if that's helpful to you, and whether there are any other topics that you think you would like us to cover, because we've got another term coming up starting in April, and we'll run another 4 lectures and 4 Q&As for you, and we haven't quite got that finalised yet. It's now nearly finalised, but we would be delighted to respond to any preferences that you have, areas of the curriculum that you're finding challenging to teach, or that you would like us to cover. So just let us know about those, and do also contact us, and we've now had 2 requests this evening for this to be posted out to people. So we'll contact you and we'll get your address details, and we'd be happy to send that out. Katherine, thank you so much. It's lovely to see you. I haven't seen you in so many months because of the slightly bizarre remote life that we have at the moment. But ordinarily, Katherine would be in an office about 4 doors or 5 doors down from me.
I'm looking forward to being back.
I'll see you again very soon.
Okay.
Katherine, thanks ever so much. And as I say, congratulations again for all of the success of this project. It's really inspiring.
Cool. Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks,
See you
everyone.
soon. Bye.